Great, thank you so much. Okay, let's begin. We're at 10 o'clock exactly. As others join, we'll go ahead and add them. Thank you for being here and welcome to our webinar. We are thrilled to see you here today. And again, this is, I think, second time that we're covering this topic this year. It's, I believe, a topic of utmost importance at what is going on presently, geopolitically, and what we are seeing in terms of cyber threats to water and wastewater industries. So we're very happy to see you here today, and thank you for joining us to delve into this critical topic. As we mentioned earlier this year, in recent years, the landscape of cybersecurity has evolved dramatically, and it keeps evolving every few weeks to every few months. We're seeing new threats and new things that come up that need to be addressed immediately. So we thought we will do a quick refresh to talk about what's going on in this sector. Cyber attacks have become a sobering reality for organizations, especially those that are tasked with managing essential services like water and wastewater. And I do not want to take up too much more of today's time. We have a very lively presentation with great speakers. So once again, thank you for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Vadim Lifshitz, a Senior Management Analyst with San Diego County Water Authority, who will moderate today's topic. We will be recording this meeting, and we'll make it available to our members on our website. Thank you for being here, Vadim. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Vlad. Good morning, everyone. My name is Vadim Lifshitz. I'm the Senior Management Analyst for Risk and Insurance at the San Diego County Water Authority. We are the wholesaler of water for water districts that serve our county, and our job is to transport, store, and ultimately to deliver water to those agencies, which then deliver it to the end users. So as we all know, water means life, and it's therefore vital for our work to continue unimpeded. And as Vlad mentioned, cybersecurity issues are evolving at a breakneck pace, maybe even daily. And they're a real risk to our core mission to safely deliver water where and when it's needed. And for many agencies, it could cause anything from disruption in being able to collect payment to not knowing which valves are open. So we're always looking to learn more and get better at protecting ourselves, which is why we've invited our speakers today, Kevin McDonald and Mike Hamilton, to give us a talk on how to better protect ourselves. So Kevin, take it away.
Well, thanks for the introduction. Mike's going to be leading the presentation today, so I'll be here to answer and chime in as necessary. But since I presented to this group in the past, I thought it was good to have a fresh perspective. So, Mike, go for it.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, everybody. And so, Mike Hamilton. Yes.
Mike, can I pause you? I'm so sorry. I forgot to read your bios. Let me handle that real quick. Sorry, it's on the next page. Today we have Kevin McDonald. He is currently the COO and the CISO for Alvaca, where he's been in leadership for over 23 years. He actively contributes to the global cybersecurity profession and is a senior law enforcement security consultant. And Kevin is involved in various organizations, including memberships in the High Tech Crimes Investigation Association, the FBI's Indiana InfraGuard, and the DHS CISA Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Working Group. He is also he's an active member of the CompTIA Global Cybersecurity Task Force and the Information Sharing and Analysis Organization's Advisory Group. We also have Mike Hamilton with us today, who is the co-founder of Critical Insight, which provides cybersecurity as a service for critical sectors. His roles have included managing consultant for VeriSign Global Security, Chief Information Security Officer for the City of Seattle, Policy Advisor for Washington State, and Vice Chair of a DHS Government Coordinating Council for Critical Infrastructure Protection. Mike also founded and serves as chair for the Pisces Project, which provides no-cost cyber monitoring for small governments and agencies in return for using data collected as a live fire curriculum for colleges and universities in the United States to train the next generation of cyber analysts. And with that, Mike, do you want to take it away?
Okay, now let's rock and roll. And I can say that because I play drums in 3 bands, which is not an important part of the bio at all. So this is an important topic. And before we get going, I just want to say that Critical Insight was just acquired by Lumify, which is why the Lumify logo is here. My new role is as field CISO for Lumify, which is a customer-facing role, and has a lot to do with projecting subject matter expertise out there. We're not here to sell you stuff. We're here to tell you stuff. So let's get going. There is a article that's 2 days old, and it is quoting Ann Neuberger, who is finally calling out Russians for intentionally looking the other way about their criminals destabilizing our healthcare sector. And so this is what DHS and the intelligence community are saying. Okay, so the healthcare sector destabilizing. I cannot think of anything more destabilizing than going after the water sector. I use this metaphor a lot. Critical infrastructure, to me, at the scale that I live my life, is my drinking water and my flushing toilet, and those are very important. I cannot think of another sector apart from energy that's more important to the continuity of the way we live our lives in this country. So here's what's been happening in the water sector, and I know that you've all seen all these articles. This is nothing new. American Water is the biggie. I forget, I think it's 100 million served by American Water, and they had a breach and they had to shut down. And to the extent that some of their utilities were gravity fed, there may have been, pretty good continuity of operations there going to manual processes. However, it was disruptive. Destabilizing, we will find out when we find out what the downstream effects of that were. Certainly, it was disruptive. The Russians have been not only identified by our own Homeland Security and intelligence community as being the ones that went and hacked water facilities, they held up their hands and took credit for it. So here are a whole bunch of recent articles on what's been happening in the water sector. Again, I'm sure this isn't news to anyone. Now, I like to boil things down. I've been in information security long before the word cyber was ever a thing. Boiling things down into the few things that you need to know in order to be prepared, here are a few things you really need to know. The most prevalent initial access vectors, someone gaining unauthorized access to your networks, are these. Number one, social engineering. So of course that's phishing, right? You're going to get, bait in the form of, hey, here's a new policy. Here's our new office occupancy policy. Click here, and you go to a SharePoint login page. Well, it's not really SharePoint. Everybody knows about that. Phishing, now it's coming over voicemail. It's coming over QR codes. It comes in through text messages and social media. Now we're seeing the deep faked videos and audio happening all the time. In fact, there's an article about a CFO that did a company meeting, right, on Teams, video of the CFO who convinced somebody in the company to start wiring away $1 million at a time. They didn't catch it until $25 million later, because that deep fake video of that CFO was so convincing, image and voice. This is happening now. Number two is credential abuse. Password guessing. If you have some kind of remote access into your networks and you are monitoring, what you're going to see is a lot of password failures. And I hope that you are monitoring these things, because if you don't know, you can't prevent this. Credential stuffing. What is that? That is, we found a database dump of 1 billion passwords that Yahoo lost when they were going through an acquisition. We're going to try every one of those passwords with a user that we've identified in your organization. Okay, there's an infinite number of passwords, passphrases you can pick, but there's a top 100 that work pretty well. If your password is winter 2024 exclamation point, you're doing it wrong. These passwords are known. They are in kits, and they're in guessing kits. Multi-factor authentication bypass, right? You're even using multi-factor authentication. You can get a phishing message and you can say, oh, this is a phishing message. I know. I just want to see how bad the SharePoint login page looks. And you click that link, you've activated a script that will peel off your session token, present it to Microsoft. Microsoft says, hey, great session you got there. Never seen your device before. Here's the challenge for the second factor. Routed back to the user who thinks they're looking at a SharePoint thing, okay? And they say, okay, you just gave up your multi-factor authentication just gave up access to Teams, SharePoint, Office 365, and all your single sign-on applications, and it took 15 seconds. Right? This is happening all the time now. So social engineering, credential abuse, and then vulnerability exploit. And vulnerability exploit is very important in operational technology environments because you have technologies that are there to be there and be operational. Availability is what you're interested in. Don't touch it, it works. And if you don't touch it for a long time, the vulnerabilities pile up. Quick explanation of what a vulnerability is. Long time ago, person writing a program called SendMail, the original mail transport agent. I need a variable for sender address. It'll never be more than 255 characters, so I'm going to give it a 255 byte buffer, right? If somebody sends in a piece of email with a sender address that's 256 characters, or 712 or 1461, it overflows the buffer. And if you get the offset just right, you can put your choice of executable code into the running stack of the machine, and you now own the machine. All right? Those vulnerabilities need to be patched, and when one is announced, it becomes a race. Countries and criminals start scanning the internet for vulnerable exposures. At the same time, they reverse engineer the patch to figure out what it fixes so they can develop the exploit to break it. Okay, these are the prevalent methods. If you were going to focus on three things that you did not want to happen, these are the three. All right,
Mike, I want to back you up on that.
Sure.
We've had multiple cases where someone's LinkedIn account was caught in, or a Facebook account was caught in a password breach, and then turns out they reused the password and they just went and injected it. And in LinkedIn, they even have your company title and your email string, so they know exactly what to enter. And then the other issue with that whole password or the social engineering is, I don't know if you all know, but KnowBe4 actually hired a spy who used AI to pretend to be someone they weren't, and they ended up getting hired as an IT professional. So social engineering is getting really, really serious.
And what's worse is what's coming. So domestic actors, Scattered Spider is a gang of basically Gen Z in the US and UK. And it's different if somebody's on the other side of the world versus in your neighborhood with proximity, so they can throw USB sticks in your parking lots and bathrooms and just wait for somebody to put it into a machine. Artificial intelligence assisted malware is coming, all right? And it's starting to happen now. This is a recent article. Hackers deploy AI written malware in targeted attacks. How did they know it was AI written? The code was commented. Bad guys don't do that, right? That's interesting. Okay, how about this? Here's a person doing experimentation on a home network, a research network, and trained an AI agent to be basically a system administrator. And he told it, okay, go log into my Linux machine. Well, he didn't give it the IP address in the Linux machine, so it whipped out a copy of Nmap, mapped his internal network, found that machine, logged in, escalated privileges to administrator, and then started to do updates to the operating system and eventually bricked it. Okay, completely automated, knew how to gain privileges. This is happening now. Now they have image manipulation and image recognition, where if you get a prompt, and has a lot to do with stealing cryptocurrency, malware recognizes seed phrase images, not ASCII text, but digs it out of an image. This is happening now. So the prevalent methods that I talked about are not going to last long, and the AI protection that we're going to need is probably right around the corner. And I know there's lots of vendors working on this. Okay, that's just quickly kind of a survey of the bad guy activity that's going on now. We don't need to dwell on that because I think everybody knows this is a problem, right? Here's what the regulators have been saying, and there's a bit of a story here. So the American Water Infrastructure Act signed into law, and that is important. It is signed into law. It is not a case of the EPA through the rulemaking process saying, here's a new requirement for you. They tried that, as I'll explain in a minute, and they had to back off. But this was signed into law, and it amended the Safe Water Drinking Act, Section 1433, and you can see what it says there. Develop or update risk and resilience assessments and emergency response plans. Okay, and it must include electronic computer or other automated systems, otherwise known as cybersecurity. All right, so this is embodied in law. This is not a rule from the EPA. It is embodied in law. It is statute. Right, that makes it different. And here's the American Water Works Association publishing their guidance, and this is about risk management. And they noted that cyber incidents are a foreseeable risk, and that's important language because there is a standard of foreseeability in the legal profession that says, I will paraphrase, if you fail to take steps to mitigate a foreseeable risk, you are guilty of negligence. Okay, that's the standard in law. All right, and it talked about the regulatory civil liability costs of doing nothing, right? They're trying to make their point here, and they recommended use of the NIST Cybersecurity Framework for Risk Assessment, okay, which is a great tool for anybody to use. It was created by the federal government. It is an outcome-based framework. It doesn't say have this control in place. It says make this thing happen. Remote access is managed, right, which is a big one. So using the NIST framework is highly advocated here. All right, fast forward to 2023. EPA said, hey, Coast Guard, you told the ports that every 2 years they have to submit a facility security plan, and we want a cyber risk assessment with it. Port said, no problem. Right? Water sector through the EPA tried to replicate that and said, you have to do a sanitary survey, and we'd like you to submit a risk assessment with that. 3 states sued, made them all back off. Okay, so they withdrew this due to these lawsuits, and they started to say, well, here's some tips, and started to look around for another way to, get everybody to be serious about these requirements. Right? EPA is looking to reduce risks from the nation states that are now, as I said, starting to go after the water sector, presumably to destabilize the population of the United States, right? To ramp up the unsatisfactory feelings we have about how the government is protecting us. Then the EPA administrator sent a letter to all the governors saying, hey, we would like you to all submit plans for your water sector. And they asked for plans by, late June. Okay, as far as I know, that hasn't happened. And then they issued enforcement measures, all right? The risk and resilience assessment must include, and there's the same language that you saw, right? So now they're starting to get sideways with everybody. What do they mean by enforcement measures? Civil and criminal enforcement actions. Remember, a foreseeable risk. If you fail to take steps to mitigate a foreseeable risk, that's negligence. And I haven't seen any enforcement yet, but I do know water utilities that I work with. Kevin, I bet you can parrot this as well. EPA is coming to have a look. I was talking to a water utility the other day for a city I won't name, and they said, yeah, we're getting ready for the EPA to get here. Can you help us out? And by the way, when the work that Kevin and I do with one another largely is around incident response. Those are not the conditions under which you want to meet us. You really want to meet us before that. And, if you want to raise your hand and say, hey, we need some help trying to figure out, what controls to have in place here to survive the EPA coming to have a look, please do.
It's a much more pleasant experience. And I want to add one thing, that HHS has done the willful neglect claim and massive penalties very successfully. And they're funding their own operations with it. So they have, let's call it a self-motivation to get it done. So I would expect that we're definitely going to see behavior like that coming forward.
That's right. However, things have changed recently, okay, in terms of the way the political winds blow. So first of all, the Chevron deference doctrine, right, which said, okay, the executive agencies, EPA, all right, can interpret the laws they're tasked with enforcing. Now, that's a pretty benign statement, but it really has a lot of weight here. And so the method that the administration has used, the combination of carrots and sticks, okay, carrots being market forces. Hey, we're the federal government. We're the largest purchaser on earth. If you want to sell us stuff, your software has to be secure out of the box. You have to have a plan to manage vulnerabilities, get those patches out. Okay, we'll go ahead and buy that. That's a market force. The other one is regulation. Through the sector-specific regulatory agencies for the critical sectors, dams, water, finance, healthcare, blah, 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 right? Everyone has a sector-specific agency. We all know the EPA regulates water. All this now is in question. So this could cascade to the other regulatory agencies, the sector-specific regulatory agencies. I put the TSA there on purpose because this all started with the Colonial Pipeline incident on the East Coast that disrupted 45% of the fuel supply on the East Coast. And all of a sudden they said, well, who was the sector-specific agency that was regulating pipelines that should have had, some cyber guidance given to them? And they said, oh, it's the TSA. Okay, well, so that's when the Biden administration said, okay, all you SSRAs, start telling your sectors what they need to do through this rulemaking process. And now the rulemaking process is all in question. So, in addition,
Mike, I want to add, I think that's a great point. And the reason HHS has been successful is because it was promulgated in legislation that those penalties are at their what do you call it, disposal. So I think there may be some requirement to change that penalties be specifically spelled out.
Yeah, no, I agree. So a lot of this is in question. Setting that aside, whether or not there are regulations that say you must do this thing, we all rely on you for flushing toilets and drinking water. So, and here come the bad guys. All right, so here's the summary, right? Our water sector is kind of easy to knock over, all right? Nation state actors are coming after water as a destabilizing tactic. If my toilet won't flush for 3 days, we have a public health emergency on our hands, and I'm probably working in the Emergency Operations Center over in Seattle. We don't know if the SSRAs are going to be able to enforce the way they say. The Supreme Court may have nullified their ability to do this. Okay, so where have we landed? What should governors be planning for? What should they be telling their own water sector? What should my own utility be doing, whether I'm being forced through regulation or not? Is the EPA going to come and have a look and, smack me upside the head? We don't know. All right. So here are a number of things that we typically find doing assessments of water sector. And I'm not going to go through the list here. I'll tell you that a lot of this is kind of 1A, right? An inventory of what's on your network is a really good thing to have. Physical security problems, no incident response plan, haven't done tabletop exercise, remote access is always a big thing. So when I say we typically find these are after probably 50 or so assessments of water utilities done by one of our subject matter experts over here at Lumify. So these are really kind of replicated so routinely that we thought we needed to point these out. And this presentation is being recorded, and we can give anybody this presentation you want if you can use this internally, maybe to drive some awareness. Okay, again, the question is, what should we be doing? What should the governor be recommending be done, right? Here's a control list that came out from CISA, top cyber actions for securing water systems. They called it TIPS, and this happened right after the EPA had to back off, all right? We can't tell you what to do, but we can really suggest what you should be doing. Okay, reduce exposure to the internet. That's a big one. That's where all the threat actors are out there. So if you have things that face the big bad internet, especially if a vulnerability is announced and a patch is released, again, it's that race. You have to get after that. Well, one of the ways you avoid that is not having stuff connected to the internet insofar as possible, right? Regular assessments. How do you do an assessment? Against the NIST cybersecurity framework. We've developed a tool. It's a spreadsheet where you can answer all the questions in the spreadsheet, figure out where your weaknesses are, and it will develop the spider charts that say, well, your maturity model ought to be out here, but you're kind of in here. And it tells you exactly where you need to apply resources to support the controls that would bring you up to the maturity level you need. Anybody that wants that spreadsheet, just ask, I'll give it to you. Change all your default passwords. And I say that because a number of water utilities were hit because they had Israeli-made programmable logic controllers, and when they were deployed, no one changed the default password. So it wasn't a big Iranian attack on water. It was the Iranians looking up default passwords for these devices and then just going and logging in where no one had gotten after basic security. We're finding this pervasive in the sector, right? So, I mean, some of this stuff is very 1A. Conduct an inventory, know what's on your network. Hey, incident response plans and recovery plans and tabletop exercises and backups, right? Backups in particular, because that's a resilience control. Okay, get ready to take a punch and get back up off the mat before the 10 count. That's resilience. Okay, continuity of operations even under duress, and then awareness training, right? Because the initial access vector is a lot of social engineering. Your people need to know how to be resistant to that. So these have been communicated by CISA. They've been given to governors. Governors' control requirements may look like this. What enforceability does a governor have in a state? Maybe more than the federal government, given where we've landed politically. I don't know, it's in question. All right, so aside from specific controls though, remember when you deploy technologies that are preventive and other controls, that you're going to have to support them. Even if you get some grant funding to do this, you're going to have to support those after the period of performance of the grant. So got to come up with some kind of funding stream for this. The people problem. Water utilities are not staffed with people that are cyber as a mindset, but you can certainly get access to folks like that. For example, you heard about the Pisces program, right? We train analysts with live fire. They need internships. Bring them in, make them do stuff, write our policies, conduct a tabletop exercise, do some awareness training of our users, right? Free interns. There are products that have been developed with DHS funding, specifically the Malcolm monitoring stack from Idaho National Lab. Malcolm is based on Elastic, which is an unstructured database, but it's capable of monitoring operational technologies. And the Pisces project was approached by Homeland Security and said, hey, we'd like you to help us get Malcolm deployed out in public utilities. And that's going to be a next year thing. We have to see what DHS budget looks like, et cetera, et cetera. But if you can monitor your utility, especially your operational technologies, that is a really good resilience control too. Why? Because there's two parts of risk: the likelihood of a bad thing happening and its impact. You lower the risk by addressing the likelihood term through the application of preventive controls, firewalls, user training, manage vulnerabilities, all that stuff, right? But the stuff is going to happen. You can't drive that risk to zero. And then you go to the impact term and you go, well, something's going to happen, and we want to minimize the impact of that. The way that you buy down that risk by addressing the impact term is through monitoring and effective response. Put out the grease fire on the stove before the house is engulfed in flames. Okay, so this Malcolm thing may show up in your utility. Partner, again, with nonprofits like Pisces. Public-private partnerships, very important. There are also ways to use State Guard to conduct assessments for you. And this will be different for every state, but they can use Title 32 and call it a training mission. So we've actually done some of that in Washington State. There are free tools that DHS provides. DHS will also provide some services like assessments, but they got a heck of a backlog. So it's actually probably more efficient to go to the Guard. Okay, your utility. So you got to get assessed. You don't know where you have control gaps until you look. So using the state local cyber grant program, you are in scope to be able to make requests for that. get a consulting engagement and do the assessment against the NIST framework like they are recommending, and you will come up with a corrective action plan. You will have a risk assessment. You budget that out, and you know what things are going to cost. And then you got to go look for some money, but at least you know what things are going to cost. Map your perimeter. Know what your exposures to the internet are. Very simple tools will do this. When I said, the AI agent whipped out a copy of Nmap, download Nmap. It's network mapping. That's what it is. It's a tool that's been around forever, and bad guys use this very, very extensively. Inventory your technology, conduct a vulnerability scan, open VAS, open VAS, vulnerability application scan. Get a copy of that, fire it off inside and look around, and it'll tell you where vulnerabilities are. Probably not in your operational technologies, but definitely on your IP network. A risk assessment against the NIST CSF. Again, a consulting engagement is probably the way to go with this, but ask me for the tool. Anybody can use it. You might need to, know what some of the language is about. And then that corrective action plan with budget estimates. That way you know exactly, here's what we have to do. Here is our roadmap to bring this up to the standard to where we're not the low-hanging fruit anymore, right? We don't have default passwords on our Israeli PLCs anymore. Okay, that's great. That means they're going to move along to the next water utility or target, right, that did not perform those actions. Resilience. Address resilience. Got to be able to take a punch. Okay, it's foreseeable event, right? This language is very specific. So here's how you address resilience. You got to be able to get back up. Got to have an incident response plan. You need to practice it. It is really good to involve regional utilities. So just like in the case of disruptions to healthcare, they have to redirect patients to other facilities. Well, the same kind of cooperation, probably through, interlocal agreement, things like that, are going to happen with water utilities. Make sure your backups are good, because if they come in and they, encrypt your operation and it's all stop, okay, you can pay them a ransom, or you can say, hey, forget it. We're just going to restore everything from backup. We're going to get back after it, right? That's where your backups are super important. Okay.
I'd like to add,
Mhm.
Mike, can I add to the backup issue? Having done hundreds of the remediations, one thing that's important to note is having a backup is not as important as having a backup that's actually viable after a threat actor leaves.
Test
So,
them.
so we see backups that are encrypted by threat actors, deleted, overwritten, you name it. So the bottom line is you cannot use the same functional rights and admin and same device that you use to manage the network to manage your backup, because if you do, the threat actor, once they get control of your admin rights, are going to turn around and control your backup. So air gapping and immutability in backup is vitally important.
Absolutely. And now, very recently, USDA and the White House are trying to boost the resilience of specifically rural water utilities. And so they have a program by where they travel around and they meet the folks at the utilities and they look at resilience controls and they make recommendations. It's called the Circuit Rider Program. And so you may be familiar with this, but the USDA doing this, I think, is very interesting. When they come to visit, it's a good thing. That one's not a bad thing. Okay. It's again, we know how you're funded. We know that you just can't pull money out of the air. There are grant programs. Let's talk about some of the resources that you have available to yourself. So assessment tools, guidance from the EPA, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. Again, I have a spreadsheet you can have on request. The critical security controls were put out by the Center for Internet Security. These are all very good guidance, standards of practice frameworks, and they're all very similar, right? So the NIST cybersecurity framework is a taco. The critical security controls is a burrito. The ingredients are the same. The packaging is a little different. And really, I really recommend use of the NIST framework because it's that outcome-based framework. It's not prescriptive. Not everybody has the same resources. So using free stuff is a great idea. when I say the NIST cybersecurity framework and use this tool, here's what the output of the tool is. So here's the maturity levels. Here's where we want to be. There are 5 focus areas in the NIST cybersecurity framework: governance, identify what's on your network, put in preventive controls, put in detective controls, and be able to respond and recover. Those 5 things. And again, outcome based. So CISA will also do vulnerability scanning for water utilities, but again, you need to get in their queue and make sure that they have you on their schedule. Planning. Here is a whole bunch of planning resources. Again, we'll give you this presentation. This will help you, bring your research up to speed. We have a lot of cybersecurity's got a lot of secret handshake language, so doing some reading is not a bad thing to do. Again, you don't want to meet Kevin and myself when your utility is on fire and not able to operate. You want to meet us well in advance and make sure that you have controls in place and you are not the low-hanging fruit. Funding. Here are some links to where you can find some funding. Again, the state local cyber grant program is happening right now. It is in some states, we're in our 3rd round. In Washington State, we're already in our 3rd round. I know other states that are just now getting started. There are 4 rounds of it. So again, if you get grant funding and you deploy technology that you have procured with grant funding, after the period of performance of the grant, you're going to have to support those technologies yourself. So that's one gotcha with grant funding. I would be talking to public utility commissions, talk about rate increases to support cyber controls, given what's on the horizon and headed our way. So here's a few resources for funding. I will say too, I'll double down on the Malcolm stack. If you use the URL malcolm.fyi, you can read all about Malcolm, developed with Homeland Security funding by Idaho National Lab. It is capable of monitoring the protocols in an operational technology environment and helping you to identify, oh, that Rockwell PLC needs a firmware upgrade. Very, very important stuff, and it's free. And if we combine that with Pisces, all of a sudden then we'll have analysts at universities who are training to be cyber analysts, which 10th fastest growing job in the country, watching your back, right? Free, right? It's supported by states. Originally, we use Homeland Security funding to deploy, and then we move funding over to a state. These are very good tools to familiarize yourself with and just be able to use in conversation. Because of course, there are commercial tools there. Armis is a commercial tool that you can deploy into an operational technology environment. It's very good, hugely expensive. We partner with Armis. We know it's good stuff, but not everybody can afford something like that. Here's a few other handy links. I'm not going to go through these, but here's funding sources, funding frameworks, standards of practice, tips, guidance, whatever you want to call these things. Just wanted to throw in lots and lots of links to get everybody up to speed, because there is no sector, apart from maybe energy, that is more critical to the way that we live our lives at the scale we live our lives. I don't care if I get another letter from a credit card company saying my credit's going to be monitored for free, right? That's going to go right into the trash. But if my toilet won't flush for 3 days, or if the purity of my drinking water is in question, that's going to be a lot worse, right? I mean, there's a real difference between those kinds of impacts. So finally, I'll just say, here's what Lumify does. We provide a combination of managed and professional services that can essentially tick off every box you need. We can do your assessments. We can do your tabletop exercises. We can help you with incident response planning. We can write policies for you to make sure that you have the right policies in place. Train your users. Do all of those things. And here's a few resources as well. I have done a daily security news blast for almost the last 20 years. We do free security awareness training online. It's going to be, I believe, the 22nd of this month, always on a Friday, always at noon Pacific. We have regular online webinars and podcasts. Sometimes when there's a large event, we'll call it an urgent panel. And then there's where you can find out more about Pisces. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back to you because that is the end of our presentation.
All right, well, thank you, Mike and Kevin.
Actually, I have a couple of things I'd like to add just on just to make sure we don't skip over them. Vulnerability scanning is very important, but do be cognizant that they're called packet cannons for a reason. If you misuse them in an OT network, you can cause yourself all kinds of drama that you don't want. It's very important that you encourage all of your employees, including the ones that are considered to be the smartest, I like to say. No question is a dumb one, except for the one you don't ask that you know you should. Very, very, very stringently avoid victim shaming. People that get tricked, people that are unsure or ask a question that others think is silly or they should know the answer to. If you make them feel uncomfortable, they just simply won't ask, and that's a bad thing. Make sure that your backups and documentation are not only accurate, but that they are off-site. If you have all of your documentation and your passwords and all of the stuff that you need to bring a network back, including the incident response plan, encrypted during an attack, it's not going to do you any good. So it's very important that that information is taken somewhere else. Be very careful about use of admin credentials or allowing people that have admin that they shouldn't have, or even those that should have, using it in areas that they don't need to use it. If you're using an admin for normal daily function, you're just inviting the ugliness to come. And the last thing is network segmentation and data mapping are vitally important, because I cannot tell you the number of places that we've gone into, including multiple water companies, that say our IT network is gapped from our OT network, and I have yet to find one that actually was. Yeah. So it's very important that you separate those two things, because a lot of the ugliness that's out in the internet and in the world comes through the IT side of the house, and that'll do it for me.
So we'll go ahead and open it up for questions from the audience, if anyone has any.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Hi, Heather, we can hear you.
Hi, thanks. Sorry, I'm at a conference, so I'm not on camera, but just curious. Thank you so much for your insight and the updates, especially with all the latest links, opportunities for funding, and the recent stories. Definitely, I can tell you, I'm sitting here in Tampa at a National League of Cities City Summit with all city mayors, and there's towns and villages, and there's lots of conversation going on about cybersecurity. So I'm taking that and kind of listening to what's going on here. Curious from, and I know you can just comment or not, with the change, with all the appointments, where do you think we're headed with water and wastewater sectors with cyber from the standpoint of that geopolitical landscape, all the new cabinet members, everything in which we're going? Yes, EPA is still kind of out there for our main kind of, but there's going to be new leadership there. Just curious what your thoughts are, because it's been under one side or the other side, and there's definitely still, I'll call it a gap between states, counties, cities under government, the governors and the emergency response versus that of our sector, which we need and we require day to day. So just.
Yeah. That is a terrific question, Heather. So I think for the most part, in terms of regulation, you're going to be on your own. I don't think any more regulation is going to come out of the EPA. I do think at a state level that governors will do something. They're going to provide some kind of guidance. I don't know what the enforceability looks like, but the big wild card here is the part that's embodied in statute, right? So the Safe Water Drinking Act modified American Water Works infrastructure and said, this is what we're going to do. We expect you to submit these risk and resilience assessments and these facility response plans, and it's embodied in law, and that's a big difference. So they have the ability to go out and actually enforce this, and they say civil and criminal penalties. Will they do that? I don't think so. I don't think new leadership at the head of the EPA is going to be having that at all. Now, setting, that kind of enforcement aside, you also don't want to be, knocked out. And so it's a little bit of, kind of self-protection that everybody needs to be involved in, which is why we're giving you all the tips, right? Here's the stuff. They're telling you these things, and you're probably going to be free to ignore that. But if you don't want to get whacked, there are some things you need to do. And really the way to go about it is to have somebody come in and do that assessment, give you that corrective action plan, right? Have somebody that can do the things that need to be done. You need an annual penetration test. You need security awareness training. Your users have to attest that they've been trained, things like this. Those are those standards of practice. Whether or not they're going to smack you upside the head for not doing it, they still need to be done. And I hope that answers your question.
And I want to add the other element that I think may actually be a positive is that historically the hackback and the international law enforcement efforts, I believe we'll see an increase in those in a substantial way. We'll see, but based on the agency conversations I've had in the last couple of weeks, they're counting on having the cuffs taken off of them and being able to fight back against some of these foreign nationals that are just allowed to do whatever they want. So we can hope, because I think the hackback was very successful in the past, and we'll see. So I fully agree with what Mike said, and I'm hoping that the law enforcement side may counterbalance some of this, and we may see fewer successful attacks while we're trying to figure out how to defend ourselves.
Yeah, and honestly, part of the Biden administration's, collection of things that they've done to address this, one of them is defend forward. And that's the Department of Defense and notably the FBI go out there and melt criminal infrastructure as they, observe them starting to be used for things like this. I don't know how effective that can be, scalable to, as many bad guy groups are out there. Remember, these folks are making so much money. They're projected to globally cause losses of $24 trillion by 2027. That's on par with the biggest economies on earth.
Yeah,
And when,
and it's bigger than the drug war.
yeah,
Yeah,
when you
by a
have
long shot.
resources like that, there's a lot of things that you can do. I hate to say that, but that's kind of where we're going. So we
Mike, I
got a
want to add something for
sure.
Heather. We've done a multitude of cities. I can't, tell you the number. It's a stunning number of cities, and it's everything from the police department to the local functionality and the fire department and communications and so on. And I want to say in general, get back to the basics. Just go back and look at the basic things that you should be doing, managing vulnerability, as Mike put it, making sure that you're not allowing social engineering and phishing to just pass through. Don't ignore training of end users. Make sure that your network is segmented so that if they get into one portion of the network, it doesn't automatically give them access to the rest of the network. There are things that any small company or any small city could do that would greatly prevent the depth and breadth, the damage that we see when these attacks are successful.
Yeah, and to identify those things, get an assessment. That will be one of the things that pops out. Segment your network, right? Do this in a controlled way, and it is extremely defensible. And I would worry about that standard of foreseeability in today's world when uh, every time there is a cyber event and we have unauthorized disclosure of protected records, for example, 2 days later is a class action suit. And it's happening in the public sector as well. Columbus, Ohio, pair of class action suits, and they've actually consolidated that into a class with all of the citizens that were affected by records loss. Water utilities don't care about records loss, but using that analogy, it can end up very badly. Here's a question in the chat. You brought up monitoring and response as a means of limiting the impact of these events. Is it possible to monitor the operational technologies using public utilities because they're not on IP networks? You need a monitoring platform that knows how to um, uh, passively, as Kevin said, you can't go throwing packets around in these environments. Bad things will happen. But passively monitoring serial protocols and uh, uh, Assembly, Armis, Medigate is usually used for medical technology. There are a number of these products. And then there's the platform that Homeland Security had developed specifically for this purpose and to give away for free, which is the Malcolm platform. So yeah, they do exist. Good questions. Give us some more.
Mike, quick question. You mentioned the Project Pisces. Can you tell us what entities are accepted, how the selection process works, and give us some more information on that?
Yeah, great question. So we are waiting for the green light from Homeland Security, and we are looking for pilot organizations to deploy the Malcolm monitoring stack into. What Homeland Security asked us to do was to help deploy Malcolm in public utilities and train operators on how to use that. We went back and said it would be better if all we did was collect data passively in the public utilities, bring it over to a centralized stack, and have analysts looking at it so that the utilities didn't need to be the analyst, right? Bringing people up to speed like that in a utility operation is could be a heavy lift. And so they like that idea, but we have to wait for their funding requests to go through because, there's got to get paid for. And it's planned to be in the current budget that's under construction right now. We don't know if that's going to be approved. We think it will. The selection process, again, right now is we're just looking for a pilot organization. So if anybody wanted to raise their hand and reach out to myself and or Kevin, we could certainly put you in that queue. Mainly, I think the best thing to do is wait and see what happens with budgeting. So we don't know. Pisces, by the way, stands for Public Infrastructure Security Cyber Education System, because it's a combination of monitoring our critical infrastructure, very, very small organizations, because we don't compete with the private sector, and then using the information collected from those networks to train analysts. And in the process of training analysts, they're being analysts, and they find things going on in cities, counties, ports, and small hospitals that are very valuable that they wouldn't have found themselves because not everybody can afford monitoring. I hope that answered the question.
I got one for you guys. Where should a water district that knows it's behind the ball begin?
I think that starts with assessment. You really can't fix or resolve or even polish, I like to say, for the better managed networks unless you've had an assessment. Self-assessment to me is often inadequate because people are concerned about finding things that make themselves look bad, or they may not have a clear-eyed view because they're so focused within their own environment and they don't recognize the way that attacks happen on any given day. So it really is important to get an independent assessment, however you go about doing that. And then from there, start with the low-hanging fruit. I will say it again, get back to the basics first. Shiny, blinky things and all these really awesome technologies are wonderful. But the vast majority of cases that I've seen that devastate the victims are often very basic things that could have been done in the budget of just about any organization. So get back to basics and focus on those and verify they're being done consistently.
Yeah, I will add to that. Yes, assessment is the way. Again, you don't want to meet Kevin and myself when nothing works and everything has gone to manual. But I will say too, if you want to know where to get started and you want to focus somewhere right now, it's the three things I brought up: credential abuse, right? The vulnerability exploit and vulnerability management in your environment, and then the social engineering, the phishing and things like that. So how do you counter that? Social engineering, it's through training, right?
Yeah.
Vulnerability management, lock yourself off from the internet as much as you can. Make sure you're scanning for those vulnerabilities. There are tools to do this, right? And to Kevin's point, be careful about spraying packets around in your OT, but focus on those three simple things because those are the most prevalently used initial access vectors.
And services like URL reputation verification and spam and antivirus for your incoming email blocking pop mail. We see networks that have great filtering on their corporate mail, but then they let anybody that wants to open up whatever personal email they have that then bypasses that filtering. The vast majority of social engineering is occurring through email. That's actually a point that we can't miss here either, is that make sure you're hardening, if you're using Office 365 in particular, make sure you're hardening and adding the 2FA to those emails, because once they get to be an intermediary between you and your communications, everything else becomes easy, whether it's business email compromise and the theft of money through false banking changes, or financial transfers, or whether it's getting you to click on something that should never have been allowed into the network in the first place. If you eliminate these vectors for the employees to make mistakes, then yes, the training is vital because they will get through, but you're not dealing with 10 decisions a day. You might be just dealing with one. And so we have to minimize these places for people to make mistakes to the degree that we can. And then, one of the things that we've done with Cal Mutual's J Prima is gotten approved to do the enterprise patching, because believe it or not, in today's world, patching is boring. It's overnight, it's weekends, it's scary. So the one thing that we do a lot of is enterprise patching to take that monotonous thing off people's plates. And if internal people don't do it, someone has to. Patching is like the number one thing in my view, after what Mike is talking about. The vulnerability is important, but the constant management of it and chasing them down and closing those holes. Think of it like the board with the marble, that where it's got holes in it. If you've got one hole, yeah, it might slip through, but if you've got 50 holes, that ball is very likely to drop through. You got to close as many vulnerabilities as you can.
And I'm going to summarize that in one sentence. Implement a policy of personal use on a personal device. Okay. Gmail and Facebook live here. And I can prove through measurements that I made when I worked at the city of Seattle, 40% of the compromised assets were due to the use, as Kevin says, personal email. So everybody's got one of these now. And if you say, okay, all personal stuff is going to be done on your phone, and you block Gmail, Facebook, social media in general, you just drove 40% of the problem off a cliff through a policy change.
That's the absolute truth too. And that's true of awareness in texting as well. Texting has become a big vector for social engineering, training people to never get exhausted in MFA. One of the things that happens is people will get 10 MFA requests and they just get tired and click yes. I can't tell you how many times we've seen that. Just train people, don't ever click yes if it's not a request you made under any conditions, even if you have to turn off your phone. Ignore it. Don't ever make it go away by approving it, because it will be the biggest mistake you likely make as an employee in a company. And we've seen entire entities at the expense of millions of dollars in losses because one employee just got tired of it and went ahead and let him in.
Okay, we're coming up to time. Got any more questions?
Vadim, do you have any closing remarks that you would like to make before we say goodbye to our attendees?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you everyone for attending. Just a reminder, this was recorded and will be posted. Just want to remind everyone that this, it sounds complicated, and that's because it is complicated, but we have resources, and it's important to keep ourselves protected. We're stewards of a vital resource. Like I said, water is life. And if something happens, we can't go very long before it's a catastrophe. So just be mindful of your cybersecurity.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much to our presenters. This was a very thoughtful, thorough, and a lot of information to digest. So we really want to thank you for being here and helping us out. We'll make the presentation available. Mike, if you can share some of the resources that you mentioned, maybe the spreadsheet, that would be great. I think our members could definitely utilize that.
Yep, I put my email address there. Anybody wants to contact me, please do.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here. And thanks for attending, everyone. Have a great day. Next webinar is going to be an open forum session. We'll be covering this presentation as well as some new questions that have been submitted since the last open forum, and that will probably happen in January with all the holiday scheduling. Great. Thank you for being here, and have a great day to everyone.
Yep.
Have a great
Thanks,
day. Stay
everybody.
positive.
Bye-bye.
Bye.